So, we've talked about the good teams in the NFL. We did our divisional round preview, which you can find somewhere. But now we're talking about the shitty teams. We're talking about the dumpster fires. Oh baby, coaching carousel time. Black Monday, the firing of all the coaches happened like a week ago, and there wasn't quite as many as you would think. Uh, some teams held on to their coaches that weren't really expected to. Thinking of like the Giants. We almost thought the Raiders would hold on to their coaches. They sent Antonio Pierce out for a press conference and then changed their mind and fired him anyway. But no, see, even with that, not a lot of openings. But we still have some with the Bears, Jets, and Saints firing their coaches midseason, and we also have Patriots, Jaguars, and Raiders who fired their coaches on Black Monday or shortly thereafter. So we're going to go through them all, see what the candidates are like, and who might be the best fit. But we can start with a team that is pretty much as of recording, so we're recording this Sunday night, and it's pretty much come out that they've found their candidate, and it didn't feel like there was much of a search anyways, and that's the Patriots hiring Mike Vrabel. What do you think of this hire, Simon?
I don't know. It's not a surprising hire, I guess. It's definitely the direction they're going to go in. I mean, even the Mayo hiring last offseason was basically bringing in a guy who has already been in the building. It's not somebody who's new to the Patriots, and they're doing the same thing again with Vrabel, right? It was pretty obvious, at least. I think to most people, it shouldn't be shocking to see Vrabel go back to the Patriots. It's an obvious pick, really. I don't hate it. I liked Vrabel when he was on the Titans. I thought he did a good job for the most part. I don't know. I think it's probably a better fit than most of the other options. Obviously, if you can get a guy like Ben Johnson, that would be great. I don't think the Patriots are going to get Ben Johnson. So I think just with that knowledge alone, I don't hate it. I think that Mike Vrabel is probably... I've seen a lot of people kind of laughing at it because it's a bit of a shoe-in pick, right? It's not a surprising one. It's not the Patriots going and bringing in a prospect. You're bringing back another guy who's already been there, which I know a lot of people probably aren't going to be too happy with. Even if Vrabel is an accomplished NFL coach, he did have a few really solid years with the Titans, but it's just the type of thing where I don't know. I think it makes sense for the Pats. Will it work out for them? I don't know. I think they've kind of had a shit team for the last little while. I don't know if one coaching change is going to be the thing to turn it around. So if they do really want Vrabel to be their coach of the future, I hope they give him more than a year to figure it out. Because that entire Pats team, obviously, who knows what they're going to look like next year. And considering they just fired a first-year coach, that's got to be a little scary for Vrabel, but who knows? We'll see.
Yeah, I think they'll probably give Vrabel a little bit more runway unless he totally tanks it. Hope. Yeah, because it's. But I do think the Patriots are a bit of a.
You say unless he totally tanks it. Is that out of the question at all with the Patriots this year? Going into next year, I mean?
I would say totally tanks it is relative. I would say totally tanks it is doing worse than they did this year, which you'd have to be pretty bad because they were 4-13. I think that's the bar. Like that, if they somehow go like 2-15 or 3-14, I could see Vrabel getting fired. Other than that, I think they're going to give him more leeway. Because after that, where do you go? And Drake May's on his third head coach in as many seasons, and you're just wasting the career of your young quarterback and whoever you're picking in this draft too, and it's just a total disaster. So I think that's part of it. To talk more about the hire in specific, I think Vrabel is a great coach. I think he was fantastic with the Titans and continually elevated a roster that wasn't as good as it performed. Like, people forget this Titans team played the Chiefs close in the AFC Championship game, and that was like peak Chiefs. That was like the best Chiefs team, one of their first Super Bowl wins. And the Titans beat a very good Ravens team. That was the 2019 Lamar MVP season. Like the Titans teams under Mike Vrabel were consistently good, and we kind of saw that when Vrabel left, the thing kind of went to shit. So I think it's a good hire in that way. What I don't like is that like you said, it was a shoe-in, and it's almost kind of embarrassing to the extent it was a shoe-in.
Yeah.
I think the only guy who ever had a remote shot at the job was Ben Johnson. I think that was the only other person they were ever considering, and I think it's just kind of shameful as for a Patriots organization to just so blatantly give out pity interviews or I don't know what the right way to describe it is, because there's the whole Rooney Rule situation where you have to interview two coaches who come from a minority background, and so when you look at who the Patriots interviewed, they interviewed obviously Mike Vrabel, Ben Johnson, and then they interviewed Byron Leftwich and Pep Hamilton, both of whom are African American, and it's like I feel so bad for Byron Leftwich and Pep Hamilton because going in, like, I don't think they ever had a real shot at the job because they clearly just did those interviews to meet the bare standards for the Rooney Rule. Because you see all these other
makes the rule, like, I understand why you need to have a rule like that, but it almost shows why a rule like that doesn't work because you can't just like go like and do that, right? Which is shitty. I agree with you. It's shitty. It's a dumb way.
I agree. Yeah, I think I agree with you there, but I also think it goes farther than that to say like the Patriots really didn't do a head coach search, and that goes beyond the whole like interviewing minority candidates and making sure there's equal opportunity. Like I think it goes beyond that to say it's just bad process from a team to not interview more than two guys, and it's been the second year in a row where they haven't really actually done interviews for the position. Because Gerard Mayo was a succession plan. It wasn't an interview. It was written into his contract that he would succeed Bill Belichick when he eventually left the team. And then they maybe considered Ben Johnson for a second, but really Vrabel was the guy. And you can see with how quickly they fired Gerard Mayo, there was some rumors out there that they did it in part because they wanted to get Vrabel on board as soon as possible. So I think it's the right answer. Like I think it's the right hire, but I think it's just a shitty process.
Yeah, and I mean, you could argue last year was a shitty process too with Mayo coming in, right?
Yeah.
Like it's starting to become a pattern for the Pats, right? And the one thing like I said, the only thing for Vrabel's sake at the very least, I hope them firing first-year coaches doesn't become a pattern because truthfully, I don't think it matters who's behind the seat next year. It's not like this Pats team is going to be a playoff team. Like you could go, oh well, the Commanders were able to fucking do something with after they got a high pick and make a run at it. The Pats aren't going to be the Commanders, and if they are, that'll be pretty nuts. I don't think that anybody would bet on something like that happening. So I just hope when, let's say, like he goes like 6-11 or something, right? I hope the Pats don't just go like, well, you lost 11 games, bye-bye, right? Like it's like I hope that's not going to be their immediate process of if you don't win us 8 games in your first year coaching this dumpster fire, you're gone. I hope that's not something we start to see. But who knows? Who knows what's going to happen with this one? It's probably like we've said 100 times. It's the least surprising hire. We're calling it what it is. It's not official, but it's gonna happen. I don't know. It's the obvious pick for them. Like it's just I don't know. Even just like scheme, it makes sense. I can picture Vrabel very clearly in a Patriots uniform. It's almost like he's worn it before.
True. We can move on to another team. So now we're getting into the actual kind of coaching carousel of it all, where we don't really have a lead on who's favored. We have some interviews, but other than that, not much. But let's start with the Chicago Bears. A very interesting scenario, obviously, because you have the franchise quarterback, or you would so assume, with Caleb Williams, where he's shown a lot of flashes, and you kind of hope that his struggles were because of all the garbage fires that were going around him. That's what I believe. But you obviously a lot of potential there. You have a good offense in theory. That's why everybody was talking about at the start of the season to say, look at all the talent. And the defense has been pretty good as well. So I'll kind of list you off some candidates here, and I think there might be one or two that draw your attention. and kind of what you think should happen, what kind of candidate you're looking for with the Bears. So they have they interviewed Anthony Weaver, the Dolphins defensive coordinator, Drew Petzing, the Cardinals offensive coordinator, Mike Kafka, the Giants offensive coordinator, Aaron Glenn, the Lions defensive coordinator, Ben Johnson, and Pete Carroll.
Pete Carroll. Oh, I did hear about that. Yeah. Oh, okay. Well, I mean, the obvious pick for them would be Ben Johnson. I think out of all of the places Johnson could go, this is probably it, right? You've got all the talent. You just pointed it out. What people were saying before this season was, look at how much talent this like Bears team has, and then they just weren't able to do anything with it, right? And I think who better than a guy like Johnson to come in and flip the light switch on what could be a killer offense, right? Obviously there's some parts of it that I don't think it's as simple as just good coaching. Obviously the offensive line needs to get better. Williams needs to show a little bit more going into the second year. But I don't know. I think it's a spot that probably makes a lot of sense for a guy like Johnson. I don't know. I think no matter what, they have to go with an offensive-minded coach. I think bringing in, which goes to the second guy that I kind of pointed out there, Pete Carroll, which is an interesting one. Always more of a defensive guy. That's my immediate thought with Carroll, right? So, I mean, sure, you're bringing in a lot of experience. You're bringing in a Super Bowl. But it was a long time ago at this point. It was a long time ago. I don't know. I don't think it necessarily makes too much sense. I think it's cool. I wouldn't hate it. I'd think, oh, good for Pete Carroll getting another shot at it, right? But I don't know. I don't know if it actually makes sense, like, fit-wise for Carroll to go over there. I don't know if you would disagree, but
I do disagree. Okay. I disagree quite a bit. I think Pete Carroll has also been interviewed for the Raiders job, I believe, and we can get there when we get there. But out of any of the jobs, this is where I would want to see Pete Carroll go, as someone who watched him for however many years.
Right.
And I think a couple things. So, again, I think, Ben Johnson is the other name that stands out. There's some other names who they are supposed to interview and haven't interviewed yet that I didn't really mention. Brian Flores, Joe Brady, Cliff Kingsbury, Ron Rivera, all other like potential candidates there. But I do think I look particularly to Pete Carroll for a couple reasons, and over Ben Johnson. Ben Johnson, to me, we don't know what he's going to be like as a head coach.
True.
But it very much seems, and I think part of the reason he went back to being an offensive coordinator is, while he is a clear genius at scheming up plays and play calling, I wonder how much he's able to lead that room and lead a team. We don't know. Maybe he'll be great at it. He could be fantastic. We have no idea. But that is something that I know Pete Carroll is fantastic at.
Yeah.
Pete Carroll, as a culture builder, is probably the best coach you could get in the NFL. We saw that with the Seahawks. Like, the team culture that Pete Carroll cultivated in Seattle, like, people wanted to come to Seattle and stay in Seattle because of Pete Carroll. Like, that's a big thing. And the reason I think that's important for Chicago is because I think Chicago is another one, the Jets are another one, where it's just like the culture is fundamentally broken. Where you had, at the end of the Eberflus era, players were openly like railing against their head coach, and the post-game interviews, just like debacle after debacle would happen. Their game management was horrid. It was just a total disaster. And we've seen that with the Bears for so long. They have a streak of, they keep a head coach a year too long, then they draft a rookie quarterback and then fire the head coach in that quarterback's first year. So it's just a complete disaster. And if you're looking for someone who can stabilize it, that's Pete Carroll. Some Bears fans have been like, well, he's old, obviously.
That is
where he's the...
That's half what I said too, right? Like
he would immediately be the oldest coach in the NFL, as he was when he was, quote unquote, moved to a different position by the Seahawks or whatever they termed it as.
Moved him as like an ambassador or something. I don't even remember what it was.
Yeah, and like I don't think he actually really did much in that role, if anything. But what I will say to that is, as anybody who's watched a Seahawks game can tell, Pete Carroll could be 95, and it seems like it wouldn't slow him down.
Yeah.
So that wouldn't be. I for all the people saying that clearly haven't watched the Seahawks game in the last however many years, and Carroll, even at like 76 or whatever he looked like he was about 25. So that's not a big worry for me. But I think, again, I think because of how great he is as a culture builder, Pete Carroll is the guy for the Bears, at least for me.
I like that logic. I wasn't thinking about it like that. I do agree with you, absolutely. I think if the goal is to set up a culture, then yeah, Pete Carroll's your guy to go for. If you're trying to bring in a guy who can really be the coach of the future alongside Caleb Williams, I think that's got to be Ben Johnson. Because sure, you can say all you want. Yeah, sure, he's not I don't know. You can discount all you want the age conversation, right? But it's do you really think Jesus, I'm having a stroke over here. Do you really think Pete Carroll's going to be able or willing to stay with the Bears for 5 to 10 years if this thing works, right? I think that has to be a conversation too. Like it's shitty and it sucks, but it is the truth of it, right? Like how much longer does he have left in the tank to actually coach? A lot of people would have thought, hell, I would have thought that firing with Seattle was the last time we were going to see Pete Carroll on an NFL field or any other field for that matter. It seemed like it was just kind of the right time, and I get it. He's absolutely a guy who he's really good at the job. He's absolutely killer at it, but I don't know. I think that's got to be the one other side of that, right? Like, sure, you can build a great culture, but what happens when he moves on from it, right? Like, I think that's the one advantage to Ben Johnson in my head is if everything goes right, you have a guy who's young, you have a guy who's gonna be willing to stick around for as long as it works, right? I think that's the one nice thing. I don't know. That's the way I look at it.
Okay. I won't go against that too much. The one other thing I will say before we move on to the next team, and I don't know how much Ben Johnson cares about this, considering you sever ties with your old team probably, but it is a division rival. Maybe it's something.
Isn't that kind of better? Isn't that kind of cool though? Because you built this incredible team, and now you get to be the one to tear it down. It's like that's fun. I think that's cool.
I guess I do think. I mean, considering that he went back to the Lions, I think there's a certain amount of like love and respect for that team
sure.
that I wonder if he wouldn't. But who knows? Maybe he doesn't even care about that at all, which is probably what's real.
I just think of the way that I would think about it. I'm just like, I'm gonna have a good time. I'm gonna beat up this team that I built. Like, that's cool. I think that's fun.
Might take a couple years.
Oh yeah, that's true.
Speaking of taking a couple of years, let's go to Jacksonville. And this is another one that's a bit of a dumpster fire, where you kind of went into the season with high expectations, and the bottom immediately fell out. And I believe they were the last team in the NFL left without a win for a decent chunk of time. You gave Trevor Lawrence a bunch of money, and he has not lived up to that contract as one of the highest paid quarterbacks in the NFL. So there's a lot to be desired. They're keeping on general manager Trent Baalke, which is kind of crazy considering he has not been very good for them.
Wasn't there like a press conference where the guy who owns the Jags said that he'd fire him if a coach gave him a good enough reason to?
Yeah.
While he was sitting directly next to him.
He was in the room. I do think, I'm pretty sure that's true. I haven't seen the clip, but I have heard about that.
I watched it, and it's pretty insane. I mean, I just look at shit like that and just wonder who would want to coach there. Like, after seeing something like that. There's just a clear lack of respect within the... I don't know. I'm talking out of my ass. But that's just the way that I'd look at something like that, right? I don't know.
Yeah. Anyway, there's a few different candidates for it. I know maybe not all of these are familiar, but if anything kind of jumps out to you. So we have, again, as we will with probably every single team, Ben Johnson has been interviewed for this job.
No.
Steve Spagnuolo, the Chiefs defensive coordinator. Right. Aaron Glenn, again, the Lions defensive coordinator. Liam Cohen, the Bucks offensive coordinator. Helen Moore, the Eagles offensive coordinator. Todd Monken, the Ravens offensive coordinator. Patrick Graham, the Raiders defensive coordinator. Robert Saleh, Joe Brady, who is the Bills offensive coordinator, and Brian Flores, Vikings defensive coordinator and former Dolphins head coach. Do any of those names stick out to you?
I kind of like a defensive guy for the Jags, is my immediate thought. I don't really know why. That's just where my brain goes. I don't mind Brian Flores. I don't don't mind Glenn either from the Lions. I think either of those makes a lot of sense because you're bringing in two guys who are absolutely brilliantly defensive minded, which takes a little bit of the pressure I think off of Lawrence, because at this point in his career, you'd think he'd be that guy who give him the give him the reins, let him run with it, and just have a crazy year offensively. But he hasn't really shown that yet. And I think if you're able to really build a good defense behind him, then maybe something switches for Lawrence. You never know. I think for a team like the Jags, I think they should be looking for a coach like that. So yeah, I think either of those guys. I wouldn't argue with pretty much anybody who is just more of a defensive-minded guy. I don't know if Pete Carroll's one of the guys that interviewed for that, but I wouldn't hate that either. Like, because I mean, if you want to talk about a team that also probably has a terrible culture, the Jags would probably be on that list. So I think for a lot of the same reasons you mentioned the Bears, I think for Pete Carroll, I think that one probably makes sense too. He didn't get interviewed though, like you said, so probably not that one. But I like a defensive guy for the Jags. I think that makes a lot of sense. I think they're one of the teams that could really benefit from a little bit of a different change in that kind of direction. But who knows? I don't know. For this one, I don't really have a clear-cut answer for you. I do think that Ben Johnson probably wouldn't go here, shouldn't go here, and probably isn't the right man for the job for the Jags. I don't know if you disagree with me on that one.
That's really funny because this is my spot for Ben Johnson.
Is it really? I look at and it's totally just because of the fact that like you pointed out the fact that we don't know what he's going to be like as a locker room guy, and this is one of the shittiest locker rooms that he could probably take a step in. Like, sure, you've already got the quarterback, sure, you have talent, but like, I don't know. I don't know. What's your logic? I'll hear it.
No, and that's a good point. I mean, like that is kind of the worry, and I mean, yeah, especially as the season kind of degraded, you worry about that. But honestly, like the Jags' culture issues, well, they are obviously evident. They don't feel as deep rooted as they do in the Bears, or like another team like the Jets, where it's like a culture of losing has been instilled over like
you're saying
not
that
just the past couple of years, but by decades.
You're saying I feel like that team is.
I don't think to the same extent because they've had peaks where they've had success.
I guess.
And they've been able to. I don't know. Like I don't think it's as widespread as the Bears or the Jets is. Partially because there's not as much fan pressure. That's another thing.
Okay, you know what? That's fair. That makes sense.
There's where when the Bears lose or the Jets lose, it's like, oh, it's the same old Jets, or it's the same old Bears. There doesn't really exist that kind of dynamic in Jacksonville.
Yeah,
in Jacksonville, I think that the expectations aren't necessarily the same. But I do think the reason that Ben Johnson would want to go here is the pieces he has on offense. Because you look at this team and you look at a guy like Trevor Lawrence, and I bet a guy like Ben Johnson, who did the Jared Goff revival project, probably looks at Trevor Lawrence and says, I can probably fix that guy in a similar way that he did. Exactly, right? I mean, maybe that's a dangerous mindset to have, but yeah. I think it's true in this instance where like he's one of the highest paid quarterbacks in the league, and he has a lot of talent. There's a reason he was one of the highest regarded quarterback prospects kind of ever. So I think it would be a really like a strong draw to work with a guy like Trevor and kind of get his career on the right track. And you've got lots of pieces too. Travis Etienne has been really good. Brian Thomas especially, like that's a really good piece to work with. If Christian Kirk comes back and Gabe Davis, I didn't love that sign, but like it's something you can do with that there. I think there's I definitely think there's stuff you can do with that offense and kind of move stuff around.
I guess no matter which direction you go at it, whether it's the Jags or if he goes to the Bears, either way you're getting a quarterback who a lot of people have called a generational talent. So you could,
Yeah.
that definitely would be. I guess if you're gonna look at, I guess I just don't have Trevor Lawrence in that like pedestal anymore in my head. But that's a fair point. I don't disagree with it. Like if that's the logic that Ben Johnson really wants to go with, if he wants to go with the I can fix him mentality, then go nuts. Honestly, it'd be pretty cool to see Trevor Lawrence turn it all around. I'm not saying he can't, but I think that if I'm Ben Johnson and I'm looking at these two offenses that obviously that I can try and take a hold of and really try and do something with, I don't know how Caleb Williams at this point isn't more of an interesting idea, because obviously he's had Trevor Lawrence at this point. He's a bit more weathered. Multiple people have tried to make it work with him at this point. What coach is he going to be on at this point? Like three or four? I don't know if Myers counts.
Third.
But,
it would be third, right?
Yeah, I don't think Myers counts. But, like, I don't know. For him, I just think that I feel like that's got to be something, too, of, like, I know, obviously, you got to kind of bet on yourself a little bit, but I don't know how you don't have the thought of, in the back of your head, of, like, these guys have all already tried to make something work here. With Chicago, it's almost a completely clean slate. Like, sure, obviously you weren't there for the first year of Caleb Williams, but you're here now for the chance to really turn what is endless potential in that Chicago building into a potential dynasty with Caleb Williams, right? Yeah. I don't know how that's not the most intriguing thing to a Johnson.
Yeah. I do see your point. I think in my mind, I like the Pete Carroll fit better in Chicago, and I think that, and not necessarily that I don't like the Ben Johnson fit in Chicago. I think that's kind of where my head goes with those.
Okay.
I will say, to your point, to kind of transition away and move on to the next team, is that I do think no matter where Ben Johnson goes, I think it will either be the Bears or the Jaguars, in my opinion. Like,
okay.
Jets have no offensive future, really, with Rodgers probably not being back. Same with the Raiders, in my opinion, and then the Saints as well. Like, there's nothing really exciting there on offense. I think it's either the Bears or the Jags are pretty much the only options, in my opinion, especially after the Patriots job got taken. So I think those are the choices.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that too, though. I can't really think of another spot that really makes sense for a guy like Ben Johnson. It just comes down to me. I brought it up tons with just like the fit of an offensive guy versus a defensive guy. It's simplifying the shit out of it, but in my head, it's the easiest way to think about it. I don't think that I agree with you. I think the Bears should be a lot higher than the Jags, but Jags are still second to me. Like for a guy like Johnson. Because obviously he's waited. He didn't pick a place to go last offseason. He chose to stay with the Lions. I think the opportunity to go and coach potentially the next big thing in Chicago, I think that just makes almost too much sense for a guy like Johnson, right? But who knows? We'll see what happens.
We'll see where it goes.
I see your point with the Jags, though. Absolutely.
Yep. We can move on to the Las Vegas Raiders, who again pulled some weird shit where they, after their last game of the season, sent Antonio Pierce out for a press conference and for him to be like, yeah, no, I still got the job. Let's come back for another season. And they were like, nah, never mind. Fuck you. You're fired anyways.
Kidding.
Yeah.
And then there was a rumor that Belichick was going to go over to the Raiders. I don't know if you heard about that.
And and then he immediately turned them down. So it'll be interesting. So here are some of the names. It's a smaller list of names of people they've either done an interview with or are interviewing. So Ben Johnson, no shit. I think he's I think he's probably going to come up on every single one of these. Robert Salah again. Todd Monken, Ravens OC, Aaron Glenn, Steve Spagnuolo, KC, DC, and then Pete Carroll. Those are the names so far. Do any of those names stick out to you?
I kind of like Carroll here for a lot of the same reason you liked him with the Bears, funnily enough. I think the Raiders kind of have a broken room at this point. Like, I don't know. I think a guy like Carroll makes a lot of sense over there. They don't necessarily have their quarterback of the future yet in the same way that the Bears do. I think that kind of gives a little bit less of a pressure on Carroll. I think he's just going to have the chance to kind of do his thing instead of having to hyper focus on, okay, we need you to fix him. Like, I think that's not necessarily the same in the Raiders. I think Pete Carroll would kind of get the chance to just do his thing. He'd get to obviously pick his quarterback, which I don't know if that's maybe a... Obviously, getting Caleb Williams right off the jump, I guess that's pretty damn cool too. But being able to pick your own guy going into the next season, for most head coaches, I feel like that's got to be a nice thing. I don't know. I think this spot makes a lot of sense if Pete Carroll is going to make another jump into the NFL. I don't hate the idea of like a guy like Salah. I think that makes a lot of sense too. I still think that the Jets definitely shouldn't have fired him. I think that was a pretty poor decision on their part.
Yeah, because I would agree.
He was definitely the best man for the job over there, and I don't think they're going to get anybody better than him this offseason. But I think that swooping up a guy like Salah almost makes too much sense for the Raiders in a lot of the same ways. Because from what I've seen, it looks like he did before Aaron Rodgers came along, he was doing a pretty good job slowly turning around the kind of culture with the Jets. But I don't know. I don't know. I think that's, if you can't get a guy like Pete Carroll, or if you don't want him because of the age concerns or what have you, I think a guy like Salah would be a good second choice.
Yeah, and I see Pete Carroll more with the Bears, and I think we've talked about that a bunch. But I agree with Salah. I think Salah would be another one of my picks for this job, because I do think with the Raiders especially, like there's a certain like archetype of being a Raiders coach, like it's a defensive mind. It's just kind of like a strong, disciplined guy. And so like I feel like there's a certain archetype I'm looking for. I did hear, I don't remember where I got this from, but I did hear that Mark Davis was trying to not go down the kind of like Patriot way route in terms of like, because he'd hired, the Josh McDaniels of the world, and that hadn't worked out. So
yeah,
maybe not like too far on that end, but I'm still seeing defensive mind kind of like staying to system kind of thing. I think Salah would be good for that, but where my mind goes is with Brady. Because I do think Brady is going to have a significant impact on who they hire, because I'm sure he's in Mark Davis's ear about this as a minority owner, and I'm sure Mark Davis takes his word very seriously. And that leads me to, and I haven't heard any like rumors about him being a leading candidate, but just seeing him on this list, I'm like, well, that would make a lot of sense. Steve Spagnuolo, Kansas City Chiefs defensive coordinator. This is a guy who I think Brady has an immense amount of respect for, because Steve Spagnuolo was really the only guy who was able to figure out and dismantle the Patriots offense with Brady as the defensive coordinator of the Giants teams that beat Brady twice in the Super Bowl. I think that might be an interesting connection to make, to say, if Brady's like, I want the best guy for the job, why don't I pick the only guy who's kind of really outsmarted me? Yeah. And the guy who, that aside, has essentially kept the Chiefs dynasty alive with how good that Chiefs defense has played over the last couple of years.
The other side of that, though, I don't necessarily think Brady's this kind of guy. I think that he's kind of more of a go with the flow kind of guy, so I don't think this will be the side of things. But what if the thought in Brady's head is, hey, fuck you. You took a Super Bowl from me, asshole. And then doesn't hire him because of that. I don't know if that's going to be I doubt it. I'm saying that I doubt it, because I like your logic a lot more. I just think that thought is really funny, and I wonder if that would ever be a conversation in that owners meeting of just like Brady going, nah, not him. Anybody but him.
I think Brady's more of a guy who just respects winning whenever he sees it. And we there was a Chiefs game that Brady did where he complimented Spagnuolo very highly and was basically like, yeah, he's very smart and I hated to play against him. Like, I think it's more of a respect thing. And that's why I'm kind of thinking, I think out of all these guys, Brady, I think, would respect a guy like Steve Spagnuolo the most. Okay. So I think that might be an interesting pick there, and I could definitely see it happening.
No, I like it. I like the logic behind that. I think that's really fun. I think that Brady, I do agree with you. I think that Brady absolutely is that type of guy. to and also the logic of I hate playing against this guy, bring him in. I think that just works.
Yeah.
I think that's just about the best way that you can build a team. You want to build a team out with a bunch of guys who you hate to play against. I think that works in most sports. Like, I think that's just an easy way to look at it, right? Because if this guy is so frustrating to play against, why not have to play against him? It's not a bad system to have. So, I mean, I totally get that logic. I think that makes a ton of sense. I mean, obviously, with the success he's found with the Chiefs, it's hard to argue against why he should get a chance as an NFL head coach. He absolutely has deserved it at this point. I don't know. I like it. I agree with you. I think that would make a lot of sense for the Raiders. Obviously, a more defensive guy, so that even goes down kind of the path that I was talking about as well earlier without mentioning his name. Like, I think that just works. I think it makes a lot of sense for the Raiders, so I don't disagree.
Yep. We can move on to the New Orleans Saints. This is another midseason firing with Dennis Allen, and that was, in my opinion, overdue.
Yes.
I think whoever comes into this Saints job is kind of a dead man walking on arrival, honestly. They are these, so I think we've kind of unintentionally gone from some of the better jobs to some of the worst jobs. I think the Saints job and the Jets job that we'll talk about later are the two worst. The Saints particularly because this roster is old and are like archaic, and it's just like there's no kind of real potential anywhere in terms of young players. Like you have your Olaves. I'm struggling to think of more names, honestly. It's just like an aging, expensive roster, and that's probably the worst thing you can have. But with that in mind, they have, again, interviewed. This is the first one where Ben Johnson's name doesn't come up, interestingly enough, in terms of who they're interviewing.
Yeah,
but we have...
You think he wants to go over there?
Probably not. But we do have the other Lions coordinator, Aaron Glenn, interviewed for this job. Mike Kafka, Giants offensive coordinator. Joe Brady, offensive coordinator for the Bills. Kellen Moore, offensive coordinator for the Eagles. David Shaw, former Stanford head coach. I've never heard of him in my life. Darren Rizzi, who was their interim head coach who finished out the season. Anthony Weaver as the Dolphins defensive coordinator. And Cliff Kingsbury, former Cardinals head coach and current Commanders offensive coordinator.
Yeah, and
do any of those names stand out?
Well, I think the most obvious one from what I did like a half second of research over the last little bit here as well. It is Aaron Glenn. Like, he's by far, from what I'm reading online, he seems like he's probably the big favorite. Former Saint as well, which kind of just makes it that much better. You mentioned there's a lot of aging stars there. I think bringing in a former player to that team, I think maybe helps with that somehow. I don't know, man. But I think no matter what, I don't disagree with you. I think it's a spot that I don't think anybody should or would want to go to, but who better than a former player? I think for the Saints, they have to be willing to give whoever takes the job more than a season, no matter what happens. I think that needs to be if I don't know if you can write that into a contract of like you can't fucking get rid of me after the first year, but if you can, I'd write it in because I don't know what you're even going to be able to do in this first year, really. I think it's better if you lose, truthfully. Get rid of everything. Throw it all away, contracts expire, clean slate. I think that's the best thing that the Saints could do. People have been saying that for years at this point, but I think that out of any of the seasons where it looks like they're probably going to finally do it, hopefully this is the year, and I just hope whoever takes the job doesn't end up basically losing a pretty solid chance just because they couldn't make this dumpster fire work. Like, it doesn't matter who's coaching the Saints team next year. They're not going to be good. They shouldn't be good, and they should want to be good. So I think you just got to hire a guy who's going to be around for a little while, hire a guy who's going to be good, and hire a guy who's going to be the future of the Saints. And I think a guy like Aaron Glenn probably makes a lot of sense for that spot.
Yeah, I think you've definitely convinced me in terms of the Aaron Glenn. Like I could see that as a strong possibility because I think the number one thing in my head is who would want to come here, and having played there, I think that's probably a stronger connection than a lot of these guys have. To me, this almost feels like I have a couple different ways, alternative ways this could go. So I think Aaron Glenn is probably one of the more likely. I think he's a sidebar. I think he's going to get a job somewhere this cycle. So this is definitely a spot for that. There's another possibility that I think, and this is what I call the David Culley route, where they essentially hire a placeholder coach that just gets like dumpster fired in his first couple of years and then fired, and then somebody better takes the job. That's like the people like they're like hiring someone who nobody knows about, like a David Shaw or a Mike Kafka, like that could almost fill that role. It feels like. I don't know how, like, obviously teams don't do that on purpose. It's more like nobody wants to come there. But in my head, I could see that happening with the Saints.
I could too.
And then the only other name that kind of stands out to me is I could see Cliff Kingsbury getting another shot in the NFL in this spot. Obviously done really well with the Commanders, but he's only gotten, it seems like, 2 interviews so far with the Saints and the Bears. I don't think he's going to get that Bears job. I think there are much better candidates. But I could see a guy like Cliff kind of wanting another in to get back into the head coaching ranks, and this might be his only shot, and I could see him taking that there. The image just fits right in my head.
See that.
But
yeah,
I do agree.
I follow the logic.
Yeah. And I do see, like, I do think Aaron Glenn is probably the number one candidate, but maybe just to set it in stone, I'll say Kingsbury, because I do think Aaron Glenn also has another chance in another place that we can talk about next.
Okay. Well, let's talk about it next.
Cool. So we have the last team on the coaching carousel that we have is the New York Jets, and this might be the worst one of them all. Well, maybe the Saints are a little bit worse.
I'd say the Saints are worse.
Maybe the Saints are a little bit worse. But it's still, obviously, at least the Saints don't have the same culture issues necessarily.
No, I'd say their culture is definitely better. Absolutely, it's better.
Yeah.
Like, that's probably the one thing this Saints team has, truthfully, is the culture. That's probably the sole thing that they have that could potentially put them over anybody else, right? Out of the other teams here. But yeah, I'll let you take it again.
Yes, and the Jets most definitely do not have that, because Aaron Rodgers and Devontae Adams, it sounds like, are gone. That leaves a crater. Things coming out about the Jets owner letting his teenage sons make personnel decisions based off Madden ratings and all that garbage that came out. I don't know if you've heard about that.
I didn't, but I totally believe it. That is awesome.
Look up that story. It's fascinating. Basically, the Woody Johnson, the Jets owner, vetoed a trade for Jerry Jeudy because his Madden rating was too low.
No, I did hear that. Okay.
And did the same thing with another guard. He was going to veto the signing of because his Madden awareness rating was too low. I think that one eventually went through, and then there's the whole thing. His teenage sons apparently have a very large sway in the decision making and will invade the locker room and shit, and it's just like a complete disaster. The culture is rancid, more or less.
Madden does not do a good job figuring out those ratings either. Just going off, that's really funny to me. I'm just going you know what? I like this guy. I like his personality. He's great. I met his family. He's terrific. But you know what? I hopped on the Xbox earlier this afternoon and I took a peek. 67 awareness rating. Can't do it. Just can't do it. It's not gonna work.
Yeah, that's how the team's operating. It's a disaster, but it's apparently true, which is, I don't know why anybody would want to come here. So that might be why they've interviewed every person with a pulse. Let me spend 15 minutes reading off this interview list.
All right.
And try to go fast. Mike Vrabel, Matt Nagy, Ron Rivera, Rex Ryan, Steve Spagnuolo, Mike Loxley, who's the head coach of Maryland, Aaron Glenn, Darren Rizzi, Arthur Smith, Joe Brady, Jeff Ulbrich, Brian Flores, Josh McCown, Bobby Slowick, Vance Joseph, and Brian Greasy.
Really? Where's he been?
Yeah.
Is he coaching somewhere? I know he's coaching somewhere, but I forget.
Josh McCown is currently the Vikings quarterback coach.
So they're hiring, straight to head coach for him, the quarterback coach. That feels like a crazy promotion. I mean, I guess you're take whoever you can, I guess. I did hear Rex Ryan. Yep. I've heard that one being tossed around. I think it's Rex Ryan himself making the argument for that one.
I was gonna say.
Yeah,
I was gonna say.
Yeah, from what I've seen,
I think the only reason anybody's talking about that is because Rex Ryan is like, hire me, please. Let me get on ESPN and talk about how much I want to be hired as the Jets coach again.
No, that's exactly why I've heard about it. But I don't know. I don't know, man. I don't think it'll be Rex Ryan. I don't know who it's gonna be. I know
it's
you kind of
led into... at this point.
Yeah, I think
he was on ESPN today talking about when Mike Vrabel got hired. He was like, "Well, I can't wait to beat you 2 times a year." It's like, buddy, you're not getting the job. How delusional are you?
Oh God. I mean, I know you were saying that you like this for Aaron Glenn. I think this makes way less sense than the Saints, and I still think that the Saints is the worst team, without a doubt. I'd still, if I'm Aaron Glenn, after all the shit we've heard out of the Jets in the last little bit, I don't know how you, if you are sitting there with 2 job offers, one from the Jets and one from the Saints, I don't know how the fuck you're picking the Jets. I don't know how you do that. I don't know, like, maybe the Saints don't want Aaron Glenn. That could be the other argument, but I think that the fit works for the team as well, in the same way that it works for the coach. So I don't know. I think Aaron Glenn will not be in the running for the Saints job, to be honest with you. I just don't think it makes sense. I think he's too good of a candidate for a team like the Jets. Yeah. That's the truth.
You know, the more we talk about it, I think you've kind of pulled me to that side. I'm kind of with you now. I had that in my mind as like, I felt like Aaron Glenn could kind of like bring a certain amount of order to the Jets, but I am also with you in saying like I don't think he's going to want to go there. The Jets
are fucking sick of Aaron's. It's not going to happen. It's just, it doesn't make sense. They can't ditch one. They can't ditch one of them and bring in another. That doesn't work. The system.
True.
That's the wrong pattern. That's the pattern you don't want to start. But yeah, I really don't know for the Jets. Like, to me, it's a total just like that entire thing over there is just like I don't know, and I don't know if I care. Honestly, I don't think it matters. Like, you were talking about just hiring somebody just so that you can suck for a bit, and then you eventually hire someone better when your chance actually comes. Yeah, I think that's what the Jets should do. I think that's what they're gonna do. I think it's what's just it. Who good is gonna want to go there? I guess you could make the same argument that you made with Kingsbury over at the Saints, where it's like him just wanting to get back up as a head coach as fast as possible. I guess I could see that. That's a possibility. But I think that you'd have to be stupid desperate. Like, it's funny, you were joking about how it's almost too embarrassing that Rex Ryan is like, please hire me, please hire me. I feel like they're not going to find a candidate who's not just like, please hire me. That's not going to happen, right? And I feel like out of all the people you listed, Aaron Glenn is the number one there, where it's like, just why? You could go anywhere else, and you chose. It's like, like, why the Jets? I don't know. At least to me, that's my logic. But who knows? I'm not in the room.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you there. You've kind of changed my mind on that. Yeah, going through all of these names, the like 25 of them, it's like, wow, this is a mix of people you probably aren't going to get, or just like random guys that nobody else is interviewing for a job.
You know what? I take it back. Hire McCown. Give it to him. I like that one.
And honestly, I don't even know if it's that bad of an idea. Like,
no, I mean, you know what? I said it.
Considering what he's considering what he's done with Sam Darnold, right? I mean, like, it's something maybe.
You know, maybe he'll be able to do that with whoever the fuck is playing quarterback over there next year.
Yeah, forget that he also led the Bryce Young rookie season. Don't remember that, but
yeah.
But I do think I'm not going to go Josh McCown with my pick. I do think there's actually a guy who I think fits kind of the role of this is, I think, the only job offer he's going to get because no other teams list him as an interview on this. But he's also a established head coach, which I think is something that the Jets need. No. he's an established head coach, and I feel like this guy could bring some level of discipline because he knows what he's doing and he can lay down the law, which I think is something the Jets need. And I feel like he can establish culture. And it's not Rex Ryan, but it is another double R, and that is Ron Rivera.
I like that.
I could see.
I like that.
Yeah. He doesn't have any other interviews listed on here, but I also know that he's a good enough coach to. His Commanders stint didn't quite go as well, obviously, as his time with the Panthers, where he was pretty spectacular. But I still think he's a good coach, and I think that kind of looking at that, like I think that's probably a good spot for him to go would be the Jets. Because out of any of these other guys, like I don't think you can take a first-time coordinator and put them in this Jets role. I feel like that's too hard of a task. I feel like you need a guy who's been established and been in his business. That's why like Vrabel before he got hired by the Patriots was another good one. Because all of these other guys, like I don't necessarily know if I trust even some of the other guys with head coaching experience, like Brian Flores. I still don't feel too good about, but. With Ron Rivera, like that feels like it fits.
I love that pick. I think I'd change mine. Yeah, I actually really like that. I wasn't thinking of Rivera. I must have just blacked out of my head when you brought it up in your list there. There's too many names.
Yeah, to be fair, I did rattle off like 25 names. So.
But no, that makes a lot of sense. I don't disagree with any of that. I think that Rivera is totally a guy who deserves another chance at the NFL. It kind of sucks for him that it would be with the Jets, but I think if there's anybody who could make it work, he's probably on my short list of people who could. I also think that I can't think of a real good reason why the Jets wouldn't want a guy like Rivera being the guy.
No.
I mean, unless
you spring a miracle for like if Aaron Glenn actually does want to come there, or if I don't know.
But like, what's the chances? I actually feel like Aaron Glenn has a higher chance of failing than Ron Rivera there, just because of exactly what you said.
I do too.
The culture and the like experience, I almost feel like that's more important. I think that a guy like Rivera, like, and that's not a shot at Glenn at all. It's just the simple fact that he hasn't been a head coach before.
You need a known quantity.
Yeah, exactly. I think for a guy like Glenn, I think going somewhere like the Saints, where hopefully he'll get a few years to develop it, he will really get to build the team he wants to build. Like, because they need to shell that thing. You can make the same argument with the Jets, but I feel like with what we've seen from ownership, I don't know if he's necessarily going to get that same creative freedom. I guess I wouldn't know if he'd get that with the Saints, but I don't know. With what we've heard out of the Jets ownership, I feel like it's a better chance.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think I really like Rivera. I think that makes a lot of sense. I like that pick a lot. I think anybody in that kind of rank of like has been there, done that a little bit. I agree with you. I think Vrabel is another good pick if he wasn't going to the much better choice for him, the Patriots. Like that's kind of a no shit for him, I think. And the Patriots, I mean, don't they have the first overall pick? Am I wrong on that?
No, they do not, because they won their last game against the Bills for no reason.
Right.
The first overall pick belongs to the Tennessee Titans.
Right. Oh, I don't know what I'm talking about. Well, anyway, like obviously you're going to get a high pick and all that. Like I think the Pats are the much better choice for that, but I don't know. I don't think he'll have the same options that Vrabel will have, right? Like I just don't think that that's necessarily there for him. So I think the Jets make sense. It's a chance for him to turn things around. He's a guy who's been there and done that. Like I said, I think it would work out well for him.
Yep. No, I would agree. And with that, that's all of the coaching vacancies. Again, less than normal this year. But it'll be interesting to see when names kind of start trickling in, as they already have, to see who teams choose, because it's a big decision. And I mean, as we've seen in some spots like Washington this year, like it can turn your franchise around more or less. And a lot of these teams are pretty far away from that. So it'll be interesting to see if any of these guys have the capacity to do that whatsoever. So, well, it'll be interesting. We'll have to see.
We definitely will. I agree with you. I think it's going to be pretty fun to watch this next little thing because there's a lot of really good spots open. There's a lot of really bad ones, and it's going to be interesting to see who decides to sit and shit and who decides to make a name out of themselves. It'll be fun to watch.
Yep.